He said that was one of the worst nights that he had ever had. He couldn't sleep because he was so scared. He was waiting for that creature to come and like rip the tents open any moment. You see, things like that, they really don't take a lot of time, but they create such a cool effect. Hey, welcome back to my studio. This is the most requested tutorial up to date, how to draw a werewolf. I know it's not Halloween, but there's always time for something scary and beautiful. In this tutorial, I will teach you step by step how to sketch a scene of werewolf in the forest. But that's not the only thing. Make sure to watch till the end, because all throughout the video I will be telling you different stories about the Slovenian werewolf. Yes, they are quite different, but very interesting nonetheless. And I will also tell you about this picture. A lot of controversy behind this, but nonetheless very, very interesting. So make sure to stay tuned till the end to find out a lot of interesting facts about werewolves you've never heard before. Now, first things first. If you would like to follow along with the tutorial, you would need a very nice smooth piece of paper. You would also need some graphite pencils, erasers, and smudging tools, or anything useful you have on hand. Now I'm also applying masking tape on the paper. That is just my choice to help me keep the edges clean, because I will be doing a lot of vigorous smudging. On the other hand, what you can always do is just use your eraser afterwards to clean up the edges. Both of the ways work. I just wanted to show you something different in this tutorial. Remember to subscribe to my channel to make sure that you don't miss out on any future videos, because all of my videos are not only relaxing, but they're also full of tips and tricks on drawing and sketching and so on. Okay, so now that I've prepped this, I'm going to start with some sketching. So I'm just going to very lightly sketch the actual composition. Now for that, I'm using lots of different photographs of, sort of a murky, scary forests and so on. So you can follow along with me, or you can always find your own images and tweak it to make it more personal. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the ground level and then mark some trees. Because there will be a lot of smudging, I will actually not be going through a lot of detail, so just marking where they are. And the werewolf will be somewhere here in the middle. So I'm going to mark the head first, and then because he is kind of a human sort of a shape base, but not really, I'm sort of going for the classic Western look. But as I said, I will tell you different stories. Very long, sort of unproportionately long arms they seem to have. Really long, scary claws. And there we go. So this is our half human, half wolf right in the center. Not going to give them any more detail at this stage, because remember, there'll be a lot of smudging going on. So I'm going to go for 6B to just give it an overall shading, that haziness, and then we'll be working from there. As I promised, I will take you step by step throughout everything, but I will also be telling you stories about the Slovenian folklore that involves werewolf stories. So what is the difference between the Western and the Slovenian stories? First of all, let's have a look at how people turn into werewolves. Now we all know when you get a bite from a werewolf, you turn into a werewolf, right? I can't remember how many days, and I think it's like full moon or something like this. Next full moon you turn into a werewolf, and then when you make your first kill, it's irreversible, or something along those ways. This is the Western story. This is the one that most of us probably have been accustomed to and know quite well. But Slovenian stories of the werewolf are quite a bit different. In Slovenia, you don't need to get a bite from a werewolf to turn into a werewolf. There are lots of different ways to turn into one. In fact, most of the werewolves are people who have chosen to become one. So, who can turn into a werewolf? Perhaps you could if you wanted to. If you are a very powerful magician, you can turn into a werewolf by casting special spells. You can also turn someone into a werewolf, if for example that person wanted to, by putting a special belt made out of a wolf fur, wolf skin, onto them and chanting some kind of a magical spell or something like that. Then you can turn that person into a werewolf. What if you wanted to create more werewolves without those people knowing? Then, again, if you were a very powerful magician, you could take any object, like for example a rock or anything of that kind, put a spell on it and place it somewhere in the forest, and then anyone who would step on it would automatically become a werewolf. How do you like that idea? Walking somewhere and then boom, a werewolf. Okay, no bites needed. You see, it's all much more simple in this kind of folklore. So next I'm going to grab a tissue and just give it a bit of a soft smudge, and I'm gonna carry on with my story. So you could also turn yourself into a werewolf by putting on either a coat made out of a wolf fur, or by putting just the skin of a wolf on top of yourself and then really wishing to turn into a werewolf. Now you see, this is the situation where it might work or it might not work. Everything depends on your destiny. If you were destined to become a werewolf, this would work quite quickly. But if you were not destined to become a werewolf, then, well, I guess wishing is just not enough on its own. So now I have smudged everything, and I'm going to go over some of the areas again. Now by now you probably can't see very well on the camera where the werewolf and everything is. I can barely notice it, so I'm gonna go over it a little bit while telling you the rest of the story. Okay, now you could also turn into a werewolf if you were part of the clan that sort of has it as a hereditary kind of a situation. So for example, there was believed that in 1200s, I think, there was a clan of people living in Belarusia that were actually sort of had that hereditary power that they could turn into a werewolf when they wanted to. So no spells needed. All they had to do is put a knife into like a tree stump and then jump over it. So once they've jumped over it, they would turn into a wolf, and then if they desired to change back into a human, they just had to repeat that process. There was one big caution there, and that is for those of them that absolutely loved being, a wolf, living in the skin of a wolf in the forest, sometimes it would be very hard to turn back. So if they spend a lot of time and they absolutely loved being a wolf, it would become almost impossible for them to turn back. I don't know why, but even if they would try to jump over the knife thing and so on, it still would not sort of help. So yeah, really tricky situation, as you can imagine. Okay, so make this foot a bit longer. Now I am going over all the details, and now the same thing with the trees as well. So going over the ground, there will be few different layers of darkening just to create that spatial distance, and I'm just going to mark the tree. Now you can already allow yourself to put more detail in, because now we will not be smudging everything. And we can shade in the foreground as well, again to create that sort of a hazy, really foggy kind of a look on the background. You know how when you walk through fog, things that are closer to you are a little bit sharper and a little bit darker, and then as you look further into the distance, everything's very soft and milky. This is the kind of effect that we're wanting to create here as well. If you want to know more about this effect, you can watch another video that I also did with the use of that effect. That was a Halloween video, so you can watch that if you'd like. Remember to build things up slowly, because it's always easier to add more sort of a shade on top rather than removing. We will be removing, but in large areas it is easier just to work a little bit more carefully, a bit more cautiously. Okay, so now let's get back to the Slovenian stories of the werewolves. So as you can see, most of the times it would be people who would be wishing to turn into a werewolf that would be turned into a werewolf, not by accident of just being bit by one. But sometimes there would be situations where people would be turned unwillingly, and it's kind of a sad situation. That was believed that when children were sort of damned by their parents, disowned and damned, they would turn into werewolves as well. Not really sure if it was the, you know, that sort of that anger or the frustration that would do it, or whether maybe these children were kicked into the woods, kicked out of their houses, you know, and that they were believed to turn into werewolves. Now I'm also gonna go over some of these trees and also shade them in, make them a little bit darker, so that we can smudge this later and turn them into more of the sort of hazier trees. You know how in Western folklore the werewolves are almost like killing machines. They are like these cruel creatures. They lose everything human about them when they turn. They can kill their family, they can, you know, their loved ones. It's almost like everything's wiped out of their memory. They turn into these scary creatures. Now Slovenian werewolves are almost the opposite, because what they were believed to do, you know, I'm telling you all of this, but just to make sure, you know, that you guys none of it is, you know, true. It is all folklore, so beautiful fairy tales. Just before, you know, you start telling me you're spreading lies, no such thing as werewolves. Okay, so in Slovenian culture, they were believed to be actually very helpful. So what they would do is they would look after the village, for example, you know, where their loved ones or their family lives. They would help them when they were hunting, for instance, you know, to bring in more animals. They would fight with other predators that were actually dangerous for people living in those villages. They would also, because they were magical characters, but they were good magical characters. You know how in all folklore, all fairy tales, you get the bad guys and the good guys. So what they would do is they would help from spells that would be cast onto the village or onto the family members of those werewolves by bad magicians. So I don't know exactly how they did it, but they had that sort of a, you know, that good light on them. And overall, unlike the Western characters, I'll do the same on the side as well with the trees. So next I'm going to use a smudge stick to smudge all of this, like that. Okay, let's get back to the story. So, you know how I said the Western sort of ones, they're like killing machines and stuff, and these guys are protective. Not only that, they were, if you look at the Western werewolves, they kind of the embodiment of everything that animal has to offer in the scary, the negative sort of a way, you know, the very bloodthirsty, very angry, you know, no control. The Slovenian ones were actually at one with nature. They were more of a very calm animal that is living in the forest, in the nature, and follows all the rules of the nature. You know, they're not killing or taking more than they need for their survival, helping, making sure that the natural order is followed correctly. So they were kind of like good spirits of the forest sort of a thing. So yeah, quite different, you know, if you sort of think about it. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going and smudging a little bit more in some areas where I think the forest could look like it's more dense. So just going over like this. Now if you don't have these smudge sticks, you can still be working with the tissue. You're just going to have to roll it up a little bit more, because you see now we're getting into smaller areas and you want to have quite a good control of this. And another difference as well that you get in this sort of a situation, you know, the more common sort of the Western story about werewolves is that there's no way to survive, there's no way to escape. Even if it's your family member that turned into a werewolf, it has to be like the, you know, the silver bullet or something like that, that, you know, that's the only thing of how you can get rid of them, and so on. But in Slovenian culture, it's very different, because they were so helpful, because they were the good guys. Normally people living in the village, and especially the family members, would never harm werewolves on purpose, you know, just sort of going and hunting them down or something like that. That would never happen, because, you know, they were the guardians of the village, because they were looking after the people. There were also specific ways to tell them apart from regular wolves, and there were a few. One of those was that their knees bent in the opposite direction, more human-like. Now those of you who know about animal structure, you know that it's not that these specific joints bend in the opposite direction to humans, it's just that the length of the bones is different, so it appears that the knee is bending backwards, where it's actually not the knee, it's the heel, you know, like this part. It's not the knee, it's the heel. So, you know, it was believed that if you see that their knees sort of bending more like humans to the side, then it was a werewolf, so you would not kill that animal. Also, they were believed to have, and this is a strange one, almost like a white line around their neck, or sometimes like more of a reddish fur growing around their neck. Not really sure where, you know, where that comes from, but that's another thing. Oh yes, and another thing is they were believed to have a human reflection, especially in very pure water, for example, like really clean river water, and you see a wolf drinking water, but if you look at the reflection, if it's a werewolf, then you would be able to see that human soul reflecting in the water, so you would be able to see the human essence. Another thing was to spot, you know, how to spot a werewolf, is that they actually behaved much more human-like. So maybe there were some situations where they seemed a little bit more conscious, or a little bit more, I don't know, I don't want to use the word smarter, because I believe that animals are very, very smart. It's just that us humans, we might not understand them, you know, so to us it seems, why they're doing it, oh, they must be not smart, but really it's just their way, you know. They can't come up to you and say, "G'day, mate." It doesn't mean that they're not thinking that in their own sort of a way, but they just, you know, their tongue doesn't roll in a certain way. I actually, when I moved and I did not know the language of the country, you know, I did not speak English. In the beginning, where I could barely put 2-3 words together, there were people that would look at me and say, oh, look, she's such an idiot. She doesn't even know what that is called, you know, like even every kid in kindy knows that. So, you know, you get a bit of that, even being a human. Okay, so now I'm going to bring out a little bit of this sort of a haziness out, like that, and just build up that sort of a darker color, because we want it to be very contrasty in some areas and very hazy in others. So that's how you can achieve that look, by just blending and creating layers of shading. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to deepen some of the things, but also I'm going to create a bit more of the detail, especially on the things that are on the foreground. You know, as you can see, just a little bit more. So here I'm just going to shade in a little bit of grass and sort of haze it out. And this is quite a close, you know, one of the closer trees. So I'm going to pay a little bit more attention to it as well. Now you can choose any of your trees and make it sort of the one that's closer by going over it, giving it a little bit more contrast, making it a bit darker, and also by giving it more detail as well, like maybe some bark that you can see. I wouldn't suggest getting into too much detail on all of this, because you know, it's still very foggy, and you still want your werewolf to be your central character. We haven't even started working on it, but you can get a little bit more into contrast and detail with some of the trees in the foreground. Okay, so I'm gonna carry on with my stories now. Also, it wasn't just the werewolves that you could find throughout Slovenian folklore, but there are also sort of like beer weirs. I don't know, like weir beer. I don't know how to say it properly, but they were believed to be also people that turned into bears. Now they were even more powerful than the werewolves, of course, being stronger, bigger animals, and they had even more magical power. And just like werewolves, they were the good guys. They were the ones that would help out their village. They would be the ones that would bring in the deers, for example, if there's like starvation or something like that. They would be the ones that would fight with you know, bad witches and witchers and things like that. So, you know, you get a lot of sort of interesting situations there. You know, it's not just the werewolves. You can get a whole bunch of other guys in there as well. And also, you know, in that folklore as well, you can actually find information where it says that not only did these bears are sort of a similar situation as the werewolves, but also it was believed that all bears are like bears, that they were humans and there was something that they've done wrong, and the gods got angry and they turned them into bears. And the reasoning for that was because bears, you know, when they walk on their hind legs, if you look at their behavior and things like that, they do have that very sort of human-like aspects to them, how they, you know, how the mothers care for their young cubs, you know, always walking around with them and stuff like this, and you know, just how they eat. You know, people would see them sort of dancing in the forests and things like that. So these are the situations that made sort of created, you know, those kind of folklore situations where bears were believed to be the people of the forest. You know, they were people and then they were turned into bears. I don't know, let me know what you think about that. I know that, you know, in areas where there are panda bears, some stories that sort of cross over. I think it's just that sort of a thing about bears as well, that sometimes, I'm not talking about polar bears, but sometimes when they're well fed and stuff like this, they're actually friendly. They're not going to attack humans, and like brown bear, for example, you play dead, they leave you alone, kind of a thing. But sometimes they're angry and they can crush things, and they can, they also have a sweet tooth, just like people as well. They love honey. In fact, in Russian, bear is called medved, which, if you sort of look at the way that the word is structured, you would see that it actually means that it's someone who knows honey. So I don't know whether it's like they know what honey is, or whether maybe they know where the honey is, because they have such a sweet tooth. So yeah, it's quite it's quite interesting. I love all those sort of stories and things. I always find them so fascinating, and it's very interesting how many different countries and cultures have very similar characters that sort of cross over, but sometimes their function is different. So like a bad guy in one folklore can be a good guy in another folklore. So yeah, and if in one situation you really want to get rid of them as soon as you can, in another situation they're that smart character that will help you and actually ward off the bad witches and things like that. So quite interesting. Let me know if you know of situations like this, like maybe a character which is known to be really scary in one situation, if you're interested in folklore at all, that actually is friendly in the other, and actually you want someone that you want to have near, and so on. Okay, so what I'm doing here, getting back to the drawing, what I'm doing here is I'm just shading these things in. So you see how this tree now, I will still go over it and soften it a little bit, but not too much already, just a little bit like that. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and then I'll come back and tell you more stories. Okay, so you can see how we're really creating that sort of atmospheric effect where you sort of really start to feel the distance. You really start to feel that sort of almost that dampness and coolness of the forest. I don't know about you guys, but I certainly can. And now I'm going to start working on the werewolf. Now it's not all for, I'll actually dust this off a little bit, because there's lots of sort of little bits and pieces from paper. You can also use these to really soften things around as well, if you want to, but I think it's a little bit early for that. But I would like to also tell you a story. This happened in Russia, right? So again, this is one of those situations where it's you believe what you want, but it's an interesting story either way, whether you believe it or not. Now, him and his mate, so it was him and two couples as well, that they all went together, and they used to go into this sort of a forest. I think that he lived in Moscow maybe, or one of the larger cities, and he decided to go to this area. I don't remember the name of it, and the name of it wouldn't really give you much. They would go there maybe like a couple of times a year all together as a group, and they would do some fishing and just have a nice sort of relaxing time in nature. They would always like book a little place in the nearby village to stay. They never stayed there previously overnight in the forest. It was sort of like a forest and also a lake as well, very calm, very sort of not many people there at all. Really wild, sort of a nature kind of a spot. But once they have booked something, but it was double booked, they came over and they said, oh look, you can't stay this night but next night. And they thought, well, it doesn't matter, we've got tents with us, we'll just go and we'll just camp on the lake, on the lakeside. They've had a guitar with them and they've had food with them, and they just decided to just have a relaxing time. So they decided to start a fire, and for that they needed to go into the forest and collect some twigs for firewood. So what happened is that they ended up splitting. I think 2 girls stayed in the camp and 3 guys decided to go 3 different ways, and like for, I don't know, half an hour collect as many twigs as they could to keep their fire going. That was that. They all went separate ways, and that one guy that I started the story with, he kept going, looking, as he described it, he was looking under his feet, to collect some useful twigs and things like that. And then all of a sudden he sees something about 20 meters away from him, and that something is standing with its back towards him. It's standing on hind legs. At first he thought maybe it's a bear, and as he froze. That creature obviously wasn't paying attention to him, did not know that he was there, and it looked like that creature was listening to his mates, as they were walking and talking to each other, distance like that, and so on. And he was just standing there, and then this creature, this character, whatever you want to call it, was just there. He couldn't understand what it was. It kind of looked like a bear, but it wasn't a bear. It was a bit too small to be a bear. The fur didn't look like the bear's fur. It looked kind of coarser and longer. Then, his mates started to talk to him, in the distance, calling out to him. He called back, and as soon as he did, that character, that creature, whatever you want to call it, instantly turned to him, looked at him, and he said that was the weirdest face that he saw. It didn't look like any animal he could recognize. He got so scared, he screamed, and he just dropped all of his twigs, everything he collected, and he ran back to the campsite. Not too long after that, his mates also made it to the campsite. He was telling them the story. No one believed him. Everyone was laughing at him, and they said that he saw something like an animal or something and just spooked himself, and which very, very plausible. That could have been that, but he was adamant that no, that was like a werewolf or something of a something really weird, a really weird creature. And then when they stayed there, he was like begging his mates to go and stay in the village, but no one really believed him, so they all stayed in their tents overnight. He said that was one of the worst nights that he had ever had. He couldn't sleep because he was so scared. He was waiting for that creature to come and rip the tents open any moment, but nothing happened really. So they all woke up in the morning, everyone had a nice night and stuff like this, and he said, I don't know what it is, but I'm never going camping there ever again. So make what you want of it. Yeah, it's an interesting story, but it's quite scary. And I still have that really interesting story about this image here to tell you, so stay tuned. I will tell you about that. That's another one, and that is even stranger situation. But for now, we need to do a little bit more drawing on this guy. Okay, so now I'm quite happy with everything here. We might decide to get back to that, but we really want to focus on the main character now. Okay, so just like with the forest, I'm going to start with the overall shading, where you can see a bit of a darkness coming through. I mean, the whole thing is really, really furry. Ears. So at the moment I'm just shading, but I'm still shading in the direction of the fur growth. So a bit of a face expression, glowing eyes. This is not a very sharp pencil, so I'm just, as I said, going over the main things, and then later on, if you decide to do more details, you can. Although keep in mind, if you're working in a very similar sort of a look, surroundings, then you might not want to get too much into detail, I think, for now, because this pencil is not sharp enough to do that. Very sort of a muscly, but very sort of a human body structure. Just darkening a little bit more behind, and you can see as the composition progresses, you know, as we've shaded the werewolf, you can see how far and how deep you need to create other areas, darken or shade them in. You see, I'm actually going around and blurring them in a little bit, you know, because you want to create that really mystical, very foggy, sort of a scary kind of a look. Okay, now it's time to get into the teeth. So I'm actually going to go a little bit more over the face to give it a little bit more definition. I think this would be the area that would be the most sort of a defined, because it, you know, it can be that scary part that you actually want to include and emphasize. And you see how with these separate strokes I'm actually creating a very sort of a furry look. This is why you also want to have that sort of outline a little bit smudged. Because then when you add these strands, it really starts to look like fur. And you see, this is why it's so helpful to put all the muscle, if you want your werewolf to be muscly, underneath, and then create the fur sort of an overlay, so that it's still somewhat visible. I don't know if it's visible on the camera, but it's definitely visible in real life as I'm looking at it. A little bit more fur on the legs. We can't see the six pack anymore, it's gone, so we can bring it back out again, only if you want to, because remember, fur would be covering the muscles. And of course, depending on what you imagine the fur, how dense it is, that's how well all of this would be showing through or not showing through. And you probably guys know, but like a lot of historians believe that, and you know, medical people, doctors and so on, think that it's all based on on the sicknesses that people would get, or psychological issues and things like that that would be more aggravated during full moon. That's why all these mythological characters turn during full moon and so on. And also the the rabies and things like that, that sort of take sometimes a few months to fully develop, to fully sort of go through from the bite area into your nervous system. So things like that are all responsible for the for the werewolf stories and things like that, which I mean you kind of have to agree to some extent, especially if you think about it. There weren't many situations where cures where people could just stop it, except for like catching the stray dogs maybe and things like that. But once you're bit, you're bit. It's now that we've got the medications, the vaccines and everything. Okay, so now I think I've done quite a bit of detail on the actual werewolf. Let's have a look at the mouth and the eyes and things. So we've got teeth. Remember, you can do like wolf teeth, or you can do anything you want, really, because they are magical characters. Yeah, I think that's done. Let's give them a nosy there. Okay, now I'm gonna use this a little eraser. If you don't have this, you can always use an eraser like this. Just remember to cut a little slice off. Here we go. Just brighten up those teeth. It's like a teeth whitening treatment. Come here, werewolf. We're going to give you most beautiful smile, a Hollywood smile. Okay, here we go. Looks like it's grinning. This is so funny. Okay, let's get him a stronger sort of and I'll give him a highlight on the nose, because remember, I mean, at the end of the day, he's half dog, so you know how dogs get those little highlights on their noses? Yeah. I know it's kind of cute, but I mean, you sort of have to give them that sort of a thing as well. Now let's brighten up the eyes. What I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to first use this petty rubber. If you don't have it, you can use a different rubber, but these are so helpful and they're not very expensive. So if you draw often enough, you want to get one of them. They also come in different sort of a softness and different hardness, so just make sure you've got the right one for you. So here, okay, and now I'm gonna guys tell you that scary story. Okay, the story about this really strange find. Now it is up to you whether you want to believe it or not, whether you think it's something that is a made-up story or something that's real. But as I said, nonetheless, it is a very interesting story. So it's two teenagers decided to just go in the forest, and I can't remember, I think they was up to something not good. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they were going to do some kind of spray painting or something. Again, don't quote me on that one. And what happened is that they accidentally bumped into this area in the forest where it looked like there was some kind of a fire or some kind of a almost like a ritual sort of that went on. At first they couldn't really understand, but they were quite curious about it, so they decided to have a look. And when they started to look closer, they found some weird bits that were burned down, And then they also found this. They couldn't tell what it was. They were worried that someone killed someone, so then they forgot what they came to the forest for, you know, whatever mischief they had planned, and they let people know about that area. Now when police came to have a look, they have realized that it looks like it's a almost like a strange sort of a like body of a almost baby, but didn't look like a human baby. It looked like some kind of a cross between a werewolf and a baby. If you look closely at the photos, you can actually see, and they said that it had like sort of it looked somewhat human, but then again it sort of had claws on the, you know, on the end of the fingertips, and had too much fur, had teeth that looked like sort of a wild animal teeth rather than human teeth, and so on. And it looked like a baby, and they did some tests. That is, of course, again, if you believe that this is real, because this could be just a little mannequin or whatever it is. And they said, the specialists said that apparently it might be a werewolf, or it might be a character that is, how do I say it, like a crossbreed between a human and like a wolf or a dog of some sort. So again, like, how is that possible, really, if you think about it? But that's the story. So what they did is, apparently they've made the whole thing secret. That is, again, if you believe this story, the whole thing secret, and they have decided that they going to investigate it more, but sort of not tell population about what it is that they found. I'm not sure about the whole story, but I really do find these images absolutely peculiar. And even if they were, you know, I mean, of course, if something like this is real, it's like a wow. But even if it's not real, just looking at this, you know, someone came up with an idea of doing something like that. It's actually, it's pretty cool. And to be executed to such a high sort of a detail as well. Like, if you look at it, you can see the furry bits, and it kind of like, it looks very cute, doesn't it? Like, if you look at it, it's sort of, you know, I don't know, there's something really cute about it, and at the same time it's sort of a little bit scary. I don't know if it's because it looks like a baby that it looks cute. By the way, this whole play, you know, this whole thing where they found it was in Mordovia, and they were sort of going around in the forest at night. I can't imagine. Can you imagine, like, stumbling upon something like that? Even if it's a fake, like, that would scare you so bad. Yeah. Now, you know what else? I really feel like I want to do like a little sort of a puddle or something, like a little lake here or something like that. Sort of give yourself an area where you want the water to be, and I think I don't want to be here, and then we can shade all of this a little bit darker. Yes, and as far as that character goes, that creature, some people even thinking it's an alien, and some people are saying that, you know, like as I said, it's like it's a werewolf. But I would actually be really, really interested to hear what you guys think about it. Like, do you think it's an alien, or you think it's a crossbreed, or, you know, like, what are your thoughts on that whole thing? Okay, so back to this, to the little lake. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to create the reflections of the trees, but to make it even more mysterious, I'm not going to, or should we do the reflection of the werewolf? What do you guys think? So here are some reflections of the trees. And here I'm just gonna put some sort of leaves, just like that, and then we'll smudge them all out. A little bit of that reflection in the water, of the light reflecting, so just by using this putty rubber, but also by hazing them out a little bit as well. You know, maybe some light that's coming through between the trees. Now here I want to create a little bit more of the fog situation, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create like this, almost like this fog coming out from behind the tree. So by sort of shaping an eraser like this, and then by pressing it, and creating these sort of rounded kind of a almost cloud-like formations. And remember, when you draw in situations like this, you have to remember that these are mythological characters, these are fairy tale personages. So when you are creating a forest or surroundings where they live, even that doesn't have to be the full-on realistic sort of effect. You can have really interesting, weird things happening as well. And just before I finish up, I want to create almost like a little tree that's sort of just growing from here, and it's closer to us than the werewolf, so the tree a small little young tree, but I think it will help to create even more depth. You see, things like that, they really don't take a lot of time, but they create such a cool effect, create even more depth. Okay, and now remove the masking tape. And then last but not least, go over the brightest areas in the composition, like the glowing eyes. And there we go. It's finished. I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know if you would be interested in other magical creatures, like maybe you would like to listen to the story about mermaids or something like that. So please comment under the video. As you can see, I do listen to your requests and I try to accommodate them as much as I can. And guys, make sure to go over to my Patreon page to check that out, because I've got a whole lot of extra videos, much more in depth on techniques videos, and super relaxing videos as well, and videos in Russian and all sorts of stuff that you might enjoy. So check that out. And also I would like to say a big thank you to all of the patrons who are already supporting me there. Thank you so much, guys, for your help. I hope you guys have a lovely day, and as always, thank you for drawing with me.